So in order to demonstrate the flexibility of the new sculpting tool, I am actually going to use these tools as terrain editing tool. I am going to first load in my NRG sandbox. And in my NRG sandbox, I am having this plane here, which is about 500,000 triangle, probably more than what I need. And what I have set up, I have a 2 material setup here that are going to interpolate based on my normal Z here. So 2 PBR material, one that is a forest ground. And if I assign it directly to my terrain here, drag and drop, enter shaded mode. And we are having here, I am going to turn off also enable the tone mapping. So it's going to be better for visualization. I am having this ground floor here, and I'm having also a rock texture. And based on that normal, I am going to interpolate between the two. If I go back to my default layout here and fire up the Vertex Sculpting tool, I am now able to sculpt my terrain. I'm going to isolate it. I'm first going to select it actually, and I'm going to isolate it back to my Vertex Sculpting tool, and I am going to get started. So what I'm going to do first is I am going to use the method vertex to snap to the edge of my terrain here. And I am simply going to use the draw brush, and I am now going to start sculpting. It's a bit too much. I'm going to adjust the factor to be something like 0.2. And I can now smoothly create the border of my terrain here. Once I got the edge of my terrain set up, I am now going to start sculpting the interior here. I am going to switch back to triangle, and using a combination of drawing and using control to actually carve inside my terrain, I am going to create some irregularity at first. Now that I've created irregularities, I am going to start simulating the erosion of the terrain. If I simply drag here and elevate my mountain here, like there's a little hill, it doesn't look much realistic. So what I'm going to do instead, I am going to switch my shape type to be square. And like that is going to allow me to have more of a clay strip kind of thing that I'm going to be able to build up, and is going to give a lot more realism to the erosion of the terrain. If I actually cool down my strength a bit and I start carving it in, if we go closer from the top view, it look more like a bunch of lines. But when we are at the terrain, the ground level, we're going to see that we are going to be able to simulate that erosion and elevate our mountains and hills in a more realistic way than simply use the regular draw brush. I am also going to use the same technique on my edges here to add a bit more of variation and simulate some sort of erosion that happened over the cliff that we're having here. At this point, our terrain looked a bit edgy. So what I'm going to do, I am going to go back, selecting my circle, and using a combination of smooth, flatten, and the erase brush, I am now going to equalize the terrain. Once I'm done with the sculpting, I need to be able to create a collision map out of this terrain here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use also tools that are going to be available in the next release. If I go in Mesh and I select my plane here, this is the plane that we have been sculpting. Obviously, we are having 500,000 triangles here. It is way too much for an acceptable collision map. So what we can do is we can use the reduction functionality. First, we build the data and generate a few LOD, let's say 16 to have enough range. Generate those LOD and then go pick a acceptable. If I switch back to wireframe here and go a bit closer, all I want to do is to select the level of detail that is going to give me enough detail for collision while not disturbing too much the topology of my terrain. I think something in this range of 25,000 should give good results, or we can go slightly higher, 58,000, which is about 10% of our original geometry here. And instead of applying it, what I'm going to do is I am going to generate a new mesh out of this that is going to be available here. And if I go back to my main mode and restore back here, I am going to now go on my right depth render layer, which is my first render layer, and simply drag and drop my new geometry here. If I enter wireframe, I can see my geometry here. And I'm actually not really interested in rendering this geometry. All I'm interested in is to generate a static mesh out of this that will be used for collision. So I am adding physic, I am setting static physic, and as a collider, I'm simply going to select triangle mesh. It's going to take a second to process. And now I am having the collision mesh that match my sculpted terrain. I am simply going to remove it from my static mesh because we're not going to actually draw it. We simply use it for our collision. And if I now go back to my second render layer and go back to visualize it, I am going to restore back the tone mapping. So now I'm seeing it in linear space, and my camera is going to start right in the terrain here. I am simply going to select it and elevate it slightly. So something like that. So when I push the play button, I will start at this specific location. So if we have a test run at it, I am going to save, and I am now going to hit the play button. And now we are having our terrain and physic that it's running in real time with the sculpting that we have been adding.